Hello there. Tonight, we step into a castle of shadows, a place where whispers echo through time. They say there once lived a queen who drank the blood of virgins, not for hunger, but for beauty, not for ritual, but to remain forever young. Was she a vampire in human form, or a woman destroyed by rumors, politics, and myth? Before you get comfortable, make sure to subscribe and like this video. It encourages me to keep bringing you strange, hidden histories, the kind that most people never hear about. Now, let us begin. The year was 1560 in the Kingdom of Hungary. Europe was in turmoil. Wars with the Ottoman Empire pressed against the borders. Plagues swept through villages, and rumors of witches and demons filled the night air. It was into this world that Elizabeth Báthory was born. She was not a simple village girl, but a daughter of power. The Báthory family was one of the most influential in Hungary, tied by blood to princes, bishops, and warriors. Elizabeth grew up in vast estates, surrounded by luxury, but also superstition. Her education was rare for women at the time. She could read and write, spoke several languages, and knew medicine, politics, and scripture. At the age of 15, she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a nobleman and soldier. The wedding was extravagant, attended by thousands. As a gift, Ferenc gave her Székely Castle, a fortress of stone perched in the mountains of present-day Slovakia. It would be here, in these dark halls, that legend says rivers of blood would one day flow. But for now, she was the wife of a soldier, left alone in the castle while he fought wars, and it was here that the whispers of her cruelty began. As the wars dragged on, Elizabeth was often left alone at Székely Castle. Her husband, Ferenc, was away on campaign after campaign, fighting the Ottoman Turks. He was called the Black Knight of Hungary, feared for his brutality on the battlefield. And Elizabeth inherited that same reputation. Servants whispered that she was merciless. She demanded obedience, order, perfection. A simple mistake, a dress not ironed properly, a floor not scrubbed clean, could bring swift punishment. Some say she slapped her maids or struck them with needles. Others claimed she enjoyed inventing punishments of her own. At first, these were just rumors. After all, nobles often disciplined their servants harshly. It was not unusual in that time. But whispers spread, and over the years, the stories grew darker. One tale, passed down through the centuries, tells of a servant girl brushing Elizabeth's hair. The girl tugged too hard, and Elizabeth struck her in anger. Blood dripped from the girl's nose and landed on the countess's hand. Elizabeth paused, staring. The skin beneath the droplet seemed smoother, brighter, younger. From that moment, the legend says, she became obsessed. Blood was no longer a punishment, it was a promise, the promise of eternal youth. Soon, villagers whispered of missing girls, daughters hired as servants who never returned home. Some said they had been drained of blood to fill Elizabeth's baths. Others swore they saw tubs being carried away at night, crimson water sloshing within. Fact or fear? The truth is blurred by centuries, but this is where the myth of the queen who bathed in the blood of virgins first takes shape. The whispers became darker with every passing year. Villagers told one another of screams rising from Székely Castle at midnight, high, piercing cries that carried down into the valley, then vanished into silence. Travelers claimed they saw strange smoke curling from the castle chimneys at hours when no hearth should be burning, and some swore that they glimpsed figures moving along the battlements, pale, slow, half hidden in shadow. Inside those stone walls, Elizabeth Báthory's legend was taking shape. According to stories told long after, she created secret chambers hidden deep within the fortress, rooms where no servant dared to enter unless summoned. The air, it was said, was always damp, heavy with the smell of iron and candle wax. Here, was where the rituals took place. One account describes her attendants filling great wooden tubs, not with water, but with blood. Elizabeth would step into the basin, her pale skin glowing in the torchlight, and sit silently while the crimson liquid embraced her body. Another account, perhaps even more disturbing, suggests she did not only bathe. She drank, not in desperation, like a starving animal, but calmly, as if she were consuming medicine. A golden goblet raised to her lips, a sip taken, her eyes closing as if she believed the life of the young now flowed through her. To the peasants who heard these tales, there was no doubt. Their countess was no longer human. She was something else, a vampire in noble dress, blood, folklore, and beauty. It is worth remembering the beliefs of that era. In 16th century Central Europe, superstition was everywhere. Vampires were not just fairy tales. They were fears as real as wolves in the forest. Villagers buried their dead with stones in their mouths to prevent them from rising. Corpses were staked through the chest to stop them from feeding on the living. And beauty was an obsession. Women of wealth smeared their faces with lead powders to stay pale. They wore masks soaked in vinegar and honey to refresh the skin. Some even rubbed pigeon droppings or powdered herbs into their cheeks, hoping for eternal youth. So, when tales spread of Elizabeth Báthory seeking youth in the most extreme way, by bathing in the blood of virgins, people were both horrified and strangely captivated. The numbers. As the years passed, the number of victims in the stories swelled. First, they spoke of a handful of missing girls, then dozens. Then, by the early 1600s, villagers whispered that hundreds had vanished. The most dramatic version of the tale claims over 600 girls died within her castle walls. 600, an impossible number for one household to conceal. And yet the rumor was repeated until it became part of the legend itself. Whether the figure was true or wildly exaggerated, it cemented Elizabeth's reputation as the most prolific female killer in history. And worse, not a killer who murdered for money or for jealousy, but for vanity, for the promise of eternal beauty. Her husband's death. When her husband, Count Ferenc Nadasti, died in 1604, Elizabeth's power only grew. She was left as one of the wealthiest widows in Europe, controlling vast lands, hundreds of servants, and enormous influence. But with her freedom came new whispers. No longer restrained by a husband, villagers claimed she was free to indulge every cruel desire, every dark ritual, every bath of blood. By this time, she was no longer just a noblewoman. In the eyes of her people, she had become a creature of terror. And so, by the first decade of the 1600s, Elizabeth Báthory's name was no longer spoken with respect, but with dread. Parents warned their daughters to stay far from the castle. Priests spoke of her sins in hushed tones, and rumors reached higher and higher until even the king himself could no longer ignore them. The investigation. By the year 1609, the whispers surrounding Elizabeth Báthory had grown too loud to ignore. For decades, villagers had murmured about missing daughters, strange lights in the castle, and screams in the night. But now those whispers reached the ears of King Matthias II of Hungary. The king owed Elizabeth a great debt of money, debts her late husband had lent during the wars. And so, when he heard the stories of her crimes, some say he saw more than justice in the opportunity. He saw a chance to erase what he owed. And so, the machinery of investigation began. The priest's reports. The first to speak out formally was a Lutheran minister named István Magyari. From his pulpit, he denounced the countess publicly. He declared that too many girls had disappeared. Too many bodies had been quietly buried. His sermons traveled, stirring suspicion among the people and drawing the attention of officials. The royal investigator King Matthias ordered his highest-ranking nobleman, György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to lead the inquiry. Thurzo was powerful, cunning, and loyal to the crown. He began collecting testimonies, not from one or two villagers, but from hundreds. Over the course of the investigation, more than 300 witnesses gave statements. Servants, peasants, neighbors, even members of the nobility, and their words painted a picture so horrific that it seemed almost unbelievable. Testimonies of horror one maid claimed Elizabeth had stabbed girls with needles until they bled. Another spoke of girls locked in freezing snow, drenched with water until they froze solid. Others described burning, starvation, beating, and mutilation. Some even claimed to have seen the Countess biting her victims, tearing at their flesh with her teeth. Again and again, the witnesses spoke of cruelty. Some stories may have been truth, others exaggeration, but together they formed an image of a noblewoman gone mad with power. The raid on the castle. On a cold December night in 1610, György Thurzo rode to Chete Castle with soldiers. They surrounded the walls, stormed the gates, and entered the fortress. What they found inside would echo through history. According to the official reports, they discovered several girls, some already dead, some dying, others imprisoned, waiting for whatever fate the Countess had planned. The image of the Countess surrounded by tortured victims cemented her guilt in the minds of those present. Whether it was staged, exaggerated, or true, the damage to her name was irreversible. Imprisonment. Elizabeth was arrested, though she never faced a full trial herself. Her noble blood protected her. But her servants, those who had assisted her or claimed to, were less fortunate. They were tortured, interrogated, and many were executed. Some were burned alive, others had their fingers torn off before the final blow. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was confined to her own castle. The legend says she was bricked into a windowless room, left with only small slits for food and air. There she remained until her death in 1614. Her punishment was not death by sword or fire, but something slower, quieter, and perhaps more cruel, a living tomb. The trial and punishment. The arrest of Elizabeth Báthory shook Hungary. A countess tied to kings and princes, accused not of political betrayal, but of unspeakable cruelty. And yet, for all the testimony and horror, Elizabeth herself was never placed in the courtroom. She was never given the chance to speak in her own defense. The servants' trial. Instead, it was her closest servants, the ones accused of carrying out her orders, who faced the court. In January of 1611, 3 of them were put on trial. Their names, Dorothea Sentes, Ilona Jo, and Janos Uivari. Under interrogation, they confessed to aiding their mistress. But how freely did they confess? It is difficult to know. Torture was common in trials of that era. A confession could be forced with the turn of a rack, the tightening of irons, or the heat of a brand. Truth and desperation became indistinguishable. Nonetheless, the court accepted their words. The servants were sentenced to death. 2 of the women had their fingers torn out with hot pincers before being burned alive. The man was beheaded and then thrown to the flames. Justice, in the eyes of the nobles, had been served. But the true architect of the crimes, the Countess herself, still remained alive. Elizabeth's sentence for Elizabeth, execution, was impossible. Her family was too powerful, her name too noble. The king and his council feared the scandal that would erupt if a countess were paraded to the gallows. Instead, they chose another path. She would be confined to her own castle in a chamber sealed with bricks, no window, no door, only a small slit through which food could be passed. And there, in silence and darkness, Elizabeth Báthory lived out the final years of her life. Her death. On August 21st, 1614, guards found her lying cold and still on the floor of her prison. She was 54 years old. She was buried quickly, at first in the churchyard at Cheshte. But the villagers, enraged by her memory, demanded her body be removed. Her remains were taken away, hidden in secret, and their final resting place remains unknown to this day. Elizabeth Báthory had passed, but her legend, the Blood Countess, the queen who drank the blood of virgins, would never die. Truth versus myth. For centuries, the story of Elizabeth Báthory has been told in whispers, books, plays, and films. The cruel noblewoman who bathed in the blood of virgins to keep her youth. The vampire countess who haunted her castle walls. But how much of it is true? The political motives. Some historians believe Elizabeth was guilty of abuse and perhaps murder, but not of the supernatural horrors she is accused of. They point out that her family was wealthy, powerful, and in the way of ambitious men. King Matthias II owed her late husband a great deal of money that could be erased if she were disgraced. And Gheorghe Thurso, the man who led her arrest, inherited many of her lands once she was gone. Was the investigation justice, or was it convenience, wrapped in blood-soaked rumor? The problem of testimony. The trial records, over 300 witness statements, are filled with gruesome details. But most of these statements were hearsay, stories told by someone who heard from someone else. And those who gave first-hand testimony were often servants who had been tortured before they spoke. Can we trust such words? Or were they molded to fit the legend already being whispered? The vampire myth. Then there is the question of the blood. No official document from the trial mentions Elizabeth bathing in blood or drinking it. That part of the legend only appeared later, in pamphlets, plays, and Gothic retellings. Central Europe was already fertile ground for vampire stories, and Elizabeth Báthory, with her castle, her cruelty, and her missing victims, was the perfect figure to shape into a monster. Over time, she became less of a noblewoman and more of a myth. A cautionary tale told to frighten children and scandalize adults. What do we believe? So who was Elizabeth Báthory? Was she a vain, sadistic woman who abused her servants beyond imagination? Was she a scapegoat, targeted by powerful men eager for her fortune? Or was she both, guilty of cruelty, but innocent of the vampire legend that history tied around her neck? The truth lies somewhere in the shadows, impossible to separate from centuries of retelling. And yet, perhaps that is why her story endures, not because of certainty, but because of doubt, not because of fact, but because of the power of myth. Conclusion. Elizabeth Báthory has been gone for more than 4 centuries. Her castle now lies in ruins, its stones silent, its halls empty, and yet, the legend of the Blood Countess still lives. Tourists walk among the broken walls, whispering about the screams once said to echo there. Writers and filmmakers return to her again and again, weaving her into stories of vampires and immortality. Even today, her name is spoken in the same breath as Dracula, a queen of blood, a mistress of death. But who was she truly? A woman of cruel habits, abusing the powerless in her household. A scapegoat, destroyed by political ambition and the greed of kings? Or a myth born of gossip and superstition, transformed into a vampire by the imagination of centuries? We may never know for certain. Her body has vanished, her trial was shrouded in politics, and her legend has long since outgrown the woman herself. Perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all, that history does not always remember us as we are, but as the story others choose to tell. And so, Elizabeth Báthory remains forever caught between fact and fiction, the queen who drank the blood of virgins, or perhaps only the queen who was accused. Thank you for spending this night with me. If you enjoyed this strange journey into the shadows of history, please remember to like this video and subscribe. It helps me bring you more of these forgotten, haunting tales. For now, rest well, and let the castle gates close behind you. Good night.